The Iranian and the Iraqi stood just feet from each other, each with a blade in his hand. Their people are mortal enemies, and now each has an opportunity to do that of which he has long dreamed. I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Well, men, they stood at about arm's length, the Iranian and the Iraqi, each ready to wield the blade in the pursuit of happiness. You see, the two men are Americans now. John Kelly reports in the Washington Post that they worked in a barber shop in Maryland, side by side, with none of the rancor which has characterized their former homeland since the start of the reign of Saddam Hussein. And the blades? Well, strictly for snipping and trimming their customers' hair. The Iraqi, Jalal al-Fartusi, has been in the U.S. since 2010 after working as an interpreter for our troops in Iraq. He saved money to bring his bride to America and also saved enough to open his own barbershop. They married in Beirut last month, but President Trump's temporary ban on immigrants from Iraq means that they can't be together just yet. But that's not the point of this story. While Jalal watched the news and thus worried about the potential blowback from the immigration order, a strange thing happened. Customers came to the shop to let him know how much they appreciated him. They recommended immigration lawyers. They said they'd call their congressman. They brought flowers, offered to throw a party for Jalal and his wife when she finally does arrive. And a 3-year-old boy gave him something saying, "This is from my sister and me. We want you to have it." It was a little handful of turf grass, a little piece of America. Stephen Green, the media would have us believe that Americans are hostile toward Muslim immigrants. How does Jalal's story fit into that narrative?
Oh, wow. Let me answer this a little more broadly, if I may. If the Iranian gentleman were my age or maybe a little bit younger, he might have been one of those 12 or 13-year-old kids that was conscripted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to march over minefields to clear it by dying in them so that Iranian soldiers would be free to advance against Iraqi positions. And if the Iraqi gentleman were probably a little older than me, he might have been a launch control officer helping to fire Scud missiles at civilians in Tehran. But you bring these same people here, you bring them to America, and something magical happens, something amazing happens, something that can only happen here. They become Americans. They become friends. They become neighbors. They become small business owners. Everything from, as we call it here, the old country, hopefully gets left aside. It's called assimilation. And according to a Pew study that I saw, I think it was last fall, Muslim Americans assimilate at the same rate as any other religion or ethnicity who comes to this country. They have the same rates of business ownership, of college degree, of giving to their church, what have you. They assimilate just as well as Italians and Irish did 100 years ago, or the French and Germans before that. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing we have here. And while we are right to debate stricter immigration control in a time of terrorism and infectious disease as well, we should always remember that for that amazing miracle to occur, we still have to remain that shining city on a hill that inspires people to assimilate.
Well, after the 9/11 terror attacks, John Dutcher says he hated Muslims. But then some Syrian refugee families started moving into his apartment complex. Little by little, John's former neighbors, mostly methamphetamine addicts and noisy alcoholics, were supplanted by Muslim families with children. Dutcher told the Washington Post, quote, "The Muslims here were all about family, and they just loved everyone. I used to be afraid when the meth addicts were here. Now I don't even look to see who's knocking on my door. I know it'll be someone with a plate of food or a kid asking me to fix his bike." Well, Lutheran Family Services of Nebraska has helped to resettle more than 60 families from war-torn Syria recently. Other Nebraska neighbors of the refugee families have brought them food and clothing for the kids. Fatima and Ahmad Al-Jassem moved to Nebraska with their 2 young children. In phone calls back to her sister, still trapped in Syria, Fatima recounts how the children are making friends in school. She's experienced no anti-Muslim bias or racism, and their Jewish friends drive them to doctor's appointments and are teaching them English. "The country is good," she told her sister. It's really good. It's still good. Bill Whittle, how does the narrative of the left-wing media compare with how Americans in flyover country actually treat their new Muslim neighbors?
When I hear stories like this, I'm more convinced than ever that that the left hates immigrants. They hate them. And the reason they hate them is because their entire theory of immigration is to keep them in separate tribes and make sure that whatever they do not assimilate into the larger culture, because if they do, they'll start believing in America and freedom and opportunity and lower taxes and all the rest, and they'll start voting Republican. However, if they can keep them in little tribes and the tribes at war with the middle, you can have your Afghan populations and you can have your Iraqi populations, you can have all these other populations. And if they come to America as a population, Scott, and stay in little areas where they all speak the language that they came here with, then this isn't America anymore. And by the way, whatever it is not going to work. The whole idea of what you were talking about is assimilation in the melting pot. The whole reason that an Iraqi and Iranian can stand next to each other with sharp objects and joke around is because they are neither Iraqi or Iranian. They're not. They're no longer Iraqi or Iranian. They're both Americans, and they don't have any reason to kill each other. But that is a decision that those immigrants made. It's a decision that many immigrants make. I'm engaged to an immigrant who's also made that decision. However, we do have the ability, and we have also, I think, the requirement to be able to keep two opposing thoughts in our head at the same time and operate on both of them. On one hand, we have to understand that the huge majority of immigrants of all kinds into this country are people who, just like our ancestors, want to be here, consider themselves Americans, want to be reborn as new people when they raise their hand and take an oath, and have struggled greatly to become here because they understand this country and what it's all about. And if we harm those people, we're committing a crime against other Americans. With that said, we also have to be able to understand that there are some people who are coming into this country who do not have that America in their hearts. On the contrary, some people coming into the country not only are not here to be Americans, some people coming into the country are here to destroy America. And that's you can deny it all you want to. This is what the left is so simple-minded about. They think that they can see one side of the coin but not the other. We can see both. But when you hear stories like this, it does remind you that America that never gets talked about, the America of the flyover states, is a kind, not just a kind, it is the kindest, most decent, most generous, most helpful, most open society in the history of the world. And if we could get more people away from cities, we wouldn't have so many problems, I don't think.
Yeah, I live here, and Bill's absolutely right.
Thank you, Thomas Jefferson. That was awesome. Well, you know, there's a famous painting done in around 1928-29, currently on display at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, by the Belgian surrealist René Magritte. It's just a picture of a pipe, the kind in which men used to smoke tobacco, a pipe with the caption, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," which means, this is not a pipe. Magritte called the painting La trahison des images, the treachery of images. It's akin to the idea of saying the word is not the thing, or the map is not the territory. Just so, the media narrative is not the story. Whatever you think of President Trump's executive order, his motivations for it, and the effects of it, chances are your view is shaped by journalists and commentators rather than by first-hand experience with Muslim immigrants, their new American neighbors, or with the president, for that matter. I'm sure there are exceptions to that in an audience as large as this one, and I'm also sure that some could recount unpleasant encounters with all of the above. But almost invariably, the narrative is not the story. And if we're fair and honest, as journalists should be, we'd have to agree with Fatima Al-Jassem. This country, composed almost entirely of immigrants, is good. It's really good. It's still good. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the Right Angle team, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.